So first of all, the first question is, how did you educate the parties involved about their video conference options? And was there any one factor that played a major role in parties choosing a video arbitration over some other sort of setting? And what factor caused most parties to decline participating in a video arbitration in your experience?
Sure. So it really is a process of education, and every case is a little bit different. I usually check in with the parties after I find out that I've been selected or assigned a case to ask what they have in mind, because sometimes they're in agreement they'd like to do this via video. Sometimes they're not sure what they want to do, whether video is the right format for the particular case or if it's not. Other times they've decided very early on, often for really good reasons, that video is unlikely to work. So a case that requires a site visit is probably the best example I've heard so far. But to get a sense of where they are, and sometimes they'll tell me at the outset that this is a case that we think needs to be in person, or this is a case where we'd like to proceed via video. Are you open to doing that? So I ask the question. I try and do that on a video conference if I can, to gauge everyone's comfort level and let folks see that it can work. But it has varied by case. Sometimes it's to avoid travel, where parties are not necessarily all in the same area, and proceeding via video lets them avoid some travel that they'd rather not do right now. Other times it's more situational in terms of what's going on with the employer and the union. So I think of the case with the nursing home, where in that case it happened to be the union that was interested in proceeding in person, right up until the employer said, well, we've got active COVID cases here in the facility. And that turned into a video proceeding really quickly. That took care of that. Let's see. So the factors that seem to lead parties to decline to proceed via video, it depends. Sometimes it is just the nature of the case. Mr. Arbitrator, we want you to come and see how folks do the work that they're doing in the plant, because it's really important and relevant for this grievance. You know, I've gotten that a few times. Other times because the parties just aren't comfortable yet, and that's understandable too. This is a really different way of practicing. But it's usually one or the other, lack of comfort, and that may vary depending on whether it's a contract interpretation case or discipline or discharge case, or just because of the nature of the issues involved.
Excellent. So in your experience, Keith, of conducting remote arbitrations, what were the biggest positives resulting from conducting a video arbitration?
Well, the commute's really easy. There are areas where you gain time and areas where you lose time. So, for example, there's really no issue of folks are stuck in traffic, and I joke about it, but it comes up through the witness, witness or counsel, or a party, is having trouble getting in because of something unexpected, and that doesn't happen, at least not in quite the same way. The parties tend to cooperate because you need to make this work, and so it's helpful when folks have shared the exhibits, or their respective exhibits and the joint exhibits ahead of time. It makes the process work very smoothly. It has saved parties' travel expense, both their own and costs related to my travel. And most importantly for me, I'm comfortable that I can do my job well in this format. As much as I would like to be in person, like I was in just about every case I did before March of this year, I'm not left with any concerns about my ability to do every facet of my job. If I had those concerns, I wouldn't do hearings this way. Outside of the arbitration context for mediations, I've had some day-long mediations over the course of the pandemic, and there is something nice to being able to grab a snack from the fridge in the 30 seconds you sometimes get as a mediator. in between caucus rooms in a way that you can't really do in person. But I know there are a couple of other subparts there, and I can see the
There
most
are.
significant problems. Sometimes folks lose connection. It could be a power outage. I had that happen not during a hearing, but during a couple of meetings over the course of the last 5 or 6 months. There's sometimes difficulty in getting the sound working. That's always a bit challenging, especially if you have multiple people in the same room, and sometimes even if it's just one person in each physical location. There are those, getting the technology to work has been the most significant problem, and yet not that big a problem. I've been lucky, I suppose, that most of these have gone fairly well. A challenge is sometimes the hearings take a little bit longer than they might in person, or at least potentially, but with good planning ahead of time, with the parties working together with the arbitrator, you can avoid most of those issues and keep things at a comparable length.
Okay. If you had your choice of doing a face-to-face hearing or remote, what would you choose at this point?
At the moment, it depends on the location. If it's going to be a longer day, I think video is preferable right now, at least compared to the alternative, which isn't what in-person hearings looked like in January or February, but what they look like now, which is everyone wearing a mask and distanced, and a little bit nervous about everyone else who's coming in and how everyone's feeling and who they've been seeing the last 3 or 4 or 5 or 7 or 14 days. And it's not, in person is not what it was. And so it's, right now for a short day, for a hearing that I can drive to, I would think about an in-person hearing. But I think especially as things are less than fully certain right now and we don't have a good sense of risk, I still see a lot of benefit to the video option, but it's really a case-by-case determination.
That makes sense. We have a question from Jeanette Fidel. I'm not sure if I'm saying her last name right, Fidel or Fideli. She wants to know, what do you use or suggest for a good green screen effect? If you don't have a solid colored wall behind them, is there something else you can use?
That's a really good question. So first, let me show you what's really behind me, because this is not where I live. This is what's really here, and this is a 5x7 green screen, and it's blue on the other side. If the green tends to work better if I'm actually putting a background up. And it's held up by a stand with a clip, and I think it ran about $100 back in April. And it's because I don't have a solid colored wall behind me. I have a mess behind me. And I have small children that usually know enough to stop at the closed door, but don't always. And so for me, this is essential. I mean, the downside is I've lived in the 3 feet between the computer and the screen for the last few months. So it's a little claustrophobic sometimes, but it works, and it works well, and it's a good way to adapt the space you're in to doing hearings this way.
Great. And Darcy Thompson wants to know, is a static photo considered rude if you're participating and you're not the arbitrator or the mediator? Is that something that is acceptable?
So if I'm understanding correctly, in other words, doing something like this. And
Yeah.
I think that depends on what your role in the process is. If for an observer or a party representative, that can be just fine. If you're the witness, probably not, unless there's a very good reason for it. If you're one of the advocates, it depends. it's something, it depends on the individual circumstances that are leading someone to do that. If it's because there may be a lot going in the background, if they're at home, it's something we can talk about. But generally, it's it's helpful to be able to get the nonverbal reactions, at least from my end as the arbitrator. If you have multiple people in the same room, there's potentially a different issue where you want to have folks on screen to have a better sense of what's going on in the room there. So for instance, if you have a witness with the management advocate or with the union advocate, that may be more, it's a different issue. But it really depends. If someone asks, we certainly address it. If it's for someone, as I said, other than the witness or the advocate, sometimes it's helpful because those of you who've spent a fair amount of time in hearings know sometimes there's someone nodding when they hear the testimony, someone who's observer or party representative, and that's okay when they're behind the witness, but everyone sees everyone this way, and those nods that aren't a big deal in the hearing that happen sometimes really naturally, just yeah, or oh, that's not right. The witness can see those now. And so if you think you're prone to doing that, you may want to turn off your video and make those arrangements.
I noticed that Elma Selena Sender, she commented on that question that she has included instructions at the very beginning, just your standard operating procedure. Here's how we're going to do this. When someone doesn't attend to appear on their screen, here's what she wants them to do. So, so the next question we have came from Theodore Ramirez, and he wants to know, how do you handle one party wanting to not be visible and the other party being okay with being live? Do you continue on?
So I want to make sure I understand the question a little bit better. If it's the notion of everyone is using
live video versus a photo, I guess.
I guess I haven't had the situation yet where a party or an advocate or a witness has said, I don't want to be on video during the hearing. Part of the benefit of doing a hearing this way, as opposed to say over the telephone, is that you do have that that visual feedback, that nonverbal feedback. So I think we'd have to have a discussion about why they're looking to do that. And as with many things, sometimes maybe arbitrators should have it put on a t-shirt. It depends. And every case is a bit different. A slightly different situation comes up where one party says we want to be in person, another party says we need to be on video for health or other concerns, and how that gets dealt with. And that again is a case-by-case determination, but that makes things complicated both in terms of the technology sometimes to make sure that you can capture everyone who's all together but maybe distanced in a way that's workable, while making sure that those on video can participate fully. Sometimes there's an issue of where should the arbitrator be, assuming that the arbitrator is willing to be together in person. Does that affect the perception of the parties in terms of advantage or disadvantage when the arbitrator is literally in the room with one party and not physically in the same space as the other? And so those are, I think, some tougher questions that I know many have confronted already, and I think that we'll continue to confront in that sort of hybrid scenario.
Sure. And one more question on the virtual background. Mickey Brock wants to know, what have you encountered as issues when using your virtual background, or what are the potential issues to be aware of?
Well, I can't wear green. If you're wearing a color that matches the background, the green screen or whatever color background you're using, the image will overlay on the parts of you that have that color. So I like wearing blue ties, so I don't use the blue screen because it wouldn't look quite right. If you're using a purely virtual background, you don't have a green screen behind you, but you're using that feature, there are a couple of interesting things that can happen. Let me tell Zoom that I don't have a green screen anymore. And so you can see I have a little bit of green behind me. I can't quite figure out what to do with my headset. But the other really interesting thing that's come up is if I say that I don't have a green screen and I hold up a piece of paper, you can't see that. And if I tell it I do, and that's because the virtual background filters that out, it doesn't look like part of a person. But if I say I have a green screen, you can see that it's a scheduling document. So it's just something to keep in mind. I can't think of that many occasions when someone's going to hold up a piece of paper to the screen, but something like that could come up from time to time. In terms of, I've heard concerns, what if someone's in the background? You can always ask someone to turn off the virtual background if that's an issue. Usually that, you'll see some indication that there's something or someone moving behind the person. That's what the system's designed to pick up, parts that look like someone's face or arms moving around. Just keep in mind that, people are bringing video and bringing their work and bringing hearings into what are personal spaces. And so there's a balance there. If it's something that someone feels is important because, for a good reason, you can certainly talk it through and adjust again on a case-by-case basis.
Understood. So another question, could you comment on any recent Zoom upgrades relating to pinning, spotlighting, or moving participant tiles and possibly demonstrate the use of those new features?
Sure. So there have been a few updates in the last few weeks. We'll leave the video, we didn't talk about video filters there, but that's something that's come up where if the setting's enabled, Zoom lets you change your appearance in certain ways. My 5-year-old's favorite is the one that makes you look like a unicorn. There's another that makes you look like the Hamburglar, and it kind of goes on from there. So I've turned those off in my meetings. I don't need to give anyone any incentive to do that, but they are there. More helpful potentially for us are those pinning and spotlighting options. And so let me see what I can do. So if you've updated recently, you can, and you're in gallery view, so that's where you see some number of faces at once, of different video feeds at once. You can put your mouse over one of the video feeds, click, and drag it around. So I'm not the host, and so I can't sort of impose that on you all, but the host of a meeting can go ahead and rearrange your Hollywood squares, your Brady Bunch view, as it were, in that gallery view to put things in a particular order. And it's not perfect. It depends on the size of your screen, the layout of your Zoom window. And so there are limits to how useful it really is. But for you personally, if you're the arbitrator, you can make sure you have the witness and the questioning advocate close together. If you're the questioning advocate, you can make sure you have the witness in a place that's helpful for you. And the other thing that one can do is the host can spotlight multiple participants at once, which is new. And so, again, if that's helpful, the host, and that's usually going to be the arbitrator, but not always, can spotlight, again, the questioning advocate and the witness so that their images are hopefully bigger on screen than others. And so it's an option to talk about. I don't think it's nice, but not necessary. I don't think it's game changing, but I know that for some people, the sort of random assortment of where faces ended up in gallery view was really frustrating. And it's something that may be helpful, and really depends on how you like to lay out your video and what works best for you individually.
I agree. One question I have for you, Keith, is in your experience of using breakout rooms, is there a way to just assign a number of breakout rooms automatically? Like everyone, like the first 2 people go in this room, the second 2 people go in this room, etc.? Or do you have to manually put people in breakout rooms?
No, you can do that automatically. There's usually an option when you create breakout rooms to assign either manually or automatically. And if it's automatic, it'll just put people in at random, which works great for large meetings and terribly for arbitration hearings.
For arbitration hearing. Gotcha.
Inevitably, the wrong folks end up in the wrong room together, and it can go downhill from there.
Correct.
I think in the next couple of weeks, Zoom is planning to introduce another update that will let participants pick the breakout room that they want to join, to really let it be used for breakout sessions. If you're interested in topic 1, go in room 1. If you're interested in topic 2, go in room 2, rather than having to have the host kind of assign and shuffle folks around. Again,
Terrific.
not as helpful for an arbitration hearing or a mediation, but for a meeting, it should be pretty great.
Right. So have you encountered any legal barriers that make conducting video arbitrations more difficult?
Not yet. Subpoenas are always interesting. And as an arbitrator, I don't get involved in enforcement of subpoenas. I have been asked to issue them in my capacity as arbitrator, and have done that. And if it's for a hearing on Zoom, for example, that's what we put. I haven't had anyone come back to say that's no good. It says Zoom and not a physical place. I wouldn't be surprised if that issue comes up at some point in the future. But in the context of subpoenas, what I've done over the course of the pandemic is when I issue them, I make sure that there's an option for the witness to appear remotely in some way. As an arbitrator, I'm typically not comfortable ordering someone to show up in person at a hearing. I don't know their circumstances. I don't know their concerns. And so if a party gets a witness to show up, that they're calling, that's fine. If they're asking me to use my authority as arbitrator to order it, I want to make sure that they at least have that option to appear remotely or in person. And so I've made sure that any subpoenas that I've signed over the last few months have included that option.
Okay, great. I should let you know, Keith, that I have enabled you to share your screen. So if you need to do so, you certainly can. And we have another question from Shane D. Can you touch on some of the potential benefits or drawbacks of the arbitrator not being in the host position in their own virtual meeting?
Well, there may be some more nuance there. So if the arbitrator isn't the host, they should still be able to effectively act as the host. So for some parties or some arbitrators have opted to use assistants. So sometimes the arbitrator says, I'm going to bring a facilitator in to help so that I don't have to worry about managing the nuts and bolts of how to coordinate the video conference. Other times the parties have arranged for that. Sometimes court reporting services provide that. And any of that is fine as long as the assistant or facilitator is operating at the instruction of the arbitrator, the same way that the court reporter does. Normally the arbitrator is not making arrangements to hire the court reporter, to retain them, to handle any of those details, but the court reporter goes on the record and goes off the record when the arbitrator directs and not when one of the parties does. So I think it's important for the arbitrator to keep that control over the hearing, whether they're exercising it directly or through an assistant. It may be that there are circumstances where one party or another is insisting on using a particular platform, and it's difficult or impossible to give the arbitrator, the software control. And in those situations, I can certainly see it working to have the arbitrator still preside over the hearing, as long as there's an understanding that those things that need to happen with the platform will still happen at the direction of the arbitrator.
Okay, great. And I think we have time for one more question. And I think there are a couple of people that really want to hear the answer to this. So could you give us your perspective on the NAA advisory opinion, which provided guidelines where an arbitrator might want to consider forcing use of video arbitration when requested by one party and objected to by another party? Have you had an opportunity to put that into practice?
Well, first, I'll give you all an advance peek. I think the last hour of the 5-hour series focuses on this issue in a bit more detail. I have not had to direct the parties to proceed to a hearing via video over the objection of a party. I do my best to put on my mediator hat at the outset and try and work out a solution that the parties can accept. That issue that comes up and that's addressed by the opinion is very much a case-by-case analysis. The opinion itself lists a number of factors that an arbitrator should consider when that situation arises. And I'll leave it there for now. I don't want to get ahead of myself and my co-panelists from the discussion we had a couple months back and that you'll see in the coming weeks.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you so much, everyone, to everyone listening in. Thank you for coming. And thank you to Keith for being here and answering all these great questions. And I don't see any other questions in the chat. So I would just want to remind everyone that our next session happens next week. It is a mock arbitration in the Zoom or virtual setting. It's going to be next Wednesday at the same time at noon Central on the 23rd. It'll be the same Zoom link that you're dialing in on today. So if you have this one, you have the Zoom link for next week as well. We just ask that you don't share it in a public space to prevent Zoom bombing, as Keith warned us about. And there are additionally 3 more sessions after that. They'll end sometime in October. So I will turn it over back to Walter, and thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Emily, and thank you, Keith, for walking us through the virtual arbitration scenarios. That was very helpful and I think very informative. And I'd like to also thank all the participants and thank you for your questions. I guess absent any additional questions for us, that'll end today's session. I'd like to recognize Keith and recognize Emily and Bernadette, who've done some really great work on this, as well as Mickey Brock with the Houston LERA chapter for the work that Mickey's done. So we're looking forward to the next 4 sessions, and I hope everyone will come back and invite your peers to join you as well. Thank you.